The imperial physician discovered it on the night of the autumn moon festival. A mysterious black mark spreading across the emperor's chest, one that appeared only when moonlight touched his skin. By morning, I would reveal why I had placed it there 20 years ago and why the price of removing it would destroy everything the emperor loved. My name is Wei Lin, and I am the most trusted servant in the Forbidden City, though I have spent 2 decades waiting for this precise moment to exact my revenge. The story begins long before that fateful festival night, in a time when I was still called by my birth name, when I was daughter to the greatest scholar in Hangzhou, when I believed that love could transcend the boundaries of heaven and earth. I was 18 years old, and I had never known suffering. My father, Wei Changwen, served as advisor to the provincial governor, a man of such learning that even the imperial court sought his counsel on matters of philosophy and governance. Our family home stood beside the West Lake, where willow trees dipped their branches into waters so clear you could see straight through to another world. I spent my days reading poetry, practicing calligraphy, and walking along the lake's edge with my childhood companion, Zhang Yao. Yao was the son of a silk merchant, a boy who had grown into a young man of exceptional beauty and gentle temperament. We had known each other since we were children catching fireflies in summer twilight. By the time we reached 18, we had fallen into a love so complete, so entire, that we felt ourselves to be 2 halves of the same soul split apart and miraculously reunited. My father approved of the match. Yao's family, though not noble, had accumulated considerable wealth and maintained an impeccable reputation. We were to be married in the spring, when the peach blossoms opened like pink clouds along the lakeshore. I remember measuring my happiness by the days remaining until our wedding, counting them like prayer beads, each one bringing me closer to the life I was meant to live. But happiness, I would learn, is a candle that draws moths of envy and destruction. The provincial governor at that time was a man named Cao Ren, an official of middling talent but immense ambition. He had risen to his position through careful cultivation of connections at the imperial court, and he dreamed always of advancement, of moving closer to the dragon throne itself. My father's wisdom had made Cao Ren's administration appear far more competent than it truly was, and the governor understood that my father was the foundation upon which his own reputation rested. Cao Ren had a younger brother, Cao Ming, who came to visit during the New Year celebrations. I first saw him at a banquet my father hosted for the provincial officials. He was 25 then, with features that might have been handsome if they had not been animated by such obvious cunning. He wore robes of expensive silk, and rings of jade covered his fingers, but there was something unfinished about him, as if he were a painting not yet complete. His eyes followed me throughout the evening, and I felt their gaze like cold water down my spine. 2 weeks after that banquet, Cao Ren came to my father with an unexpected proposal. His brother Cao Ming wished to marry me. The governor spoke of the advantages of such a union, how it would bind our families together, how it would secure my father's position and provide protection for our household. He spoke of the connections at court that Cao Ming possessed, the future that awaited him in the capital. My father refused politely but firmly. I was already engaged, he explained, and though he valued the governor's friendship and patronage, some bonds could not be broken once made. I watched Cao Ren's face as my father spoke these words. Something flickered behind his eyes, something that made me think of a snake coiling before it strikes. The governor smiled and nodded and said he understood perfectly. He raised his cup of wine and toasted my father's loyalty and honor. But I knew, even in that moment, that we had made an enemy. Still, I was young and in love, and danger seemed like something that happened to other people, in other stories. Yao and I continued our walks by the lake. We made plans for our future, for the children we would have, for the life we would build together. Spring approached with its promise of renewal and beginning. Then, 3 weeks before our wedding, the soldiers came. They arrived at dawn, when mist still hung over the West Lake, like a veil between worlds. The captain carried an imperial warrant bearing the seal of the Ministry of Justice. My father was accused of corruption, of accepting bribes, of embezzling funds meant for famine relief. The charges were detailed and damning, supported by forged documents that had been prepared with meticulous care. I watched as they shackled my father's hands. He looked at me with eyes full of sorrow but also warning. He knew, as I knew, exactly who had arranged this destruction. But knowing and proving are different things, and Cao Ren had been careful. My father was transported to the capital for trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming, though entirely fabricated. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Our family property was confiscated. Our name was stripped of all honor. I was left with nothing but the clothes I wore and the certain knowledge that my father would die for a crime he had not committed. I went to Cao Ren to beg for mercy. I prostrated myself before him in his official residence, pressing my forehead to the cold floor tiles until my skin split and bled. I offered him everything I had left to offer, myself. I would marry Cao Ming if only he would use his influence to save my father's life. The governor helped me to my feet with a gentleness that was more obscene than violence. He told me my offer was generous, but came too late. The emperor himself had signed the death warrant. There was nothing to be done. My father would be executed at the next full moon. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, that my former betrothed Zhang Yao had been arrested as well. As an associate of my corrupt father, he too would be investigated. These matters could become complicated. Young men had been known to die during questioning. The meaning was clear. I had nothing left to bargain with. Cao Ren had taken everything, and he had done it because I had been promised to another man, because his brother's desire had been thwarted, because he could. I watched my father die on a bright spring morning when the peach blossoms were in full bloom. They beheaded him in the public square while a crowd gathered to witness the fate of a corrupt official. I stood at the edge of that crowd, hidden in a peasant's rough cotton robe, and I felt something inside me turn to ice and iron. That night, I went to the temple of the moon goddess that stood on an island in the West Lake. I had heard stories, whispers, of a spirit that dwelt there, an ancient being that was neither demon nor deity, but something in between. The temple had been old when the Tang dynasty was young, and there were older altars beneath its foundation, places where prayers were made in languages no one remembered. I crossed to the island in a stolen boat, rowing through moonlight that turned the water to silver. The temple was empty, or seemed to be. I walked past the statue of the moon goddess with her serene face and her robes that flowed like water frozen in stone. Behind the main hall, I found a door that opened onto stairs leading down into darkness. I descended. The chamber below was older than the temple above, older than the city, perhaps older than memory itself. The walls were carved with symbols I could not read, and in the center of the room stood a stone altar stained with offerings of ages past. The air smelled of incense and earth, and something else, something like the moment before lightning strikes. I cut my palm with a knife I had brought for this purpose. I let my blood fall upon the altar, and I spoke into the darkness. I offer my life, my soul, everything I am or ever will be, to the power that dwells in this place. I ask for only one gift in return, the knowledge and means to destroy those who have destroyed me. The darkness answered. It did not speak in words, but in knowledge that poured into my mind like water into an empty vessel. I learned things that no mortal should know. I learned the true names of vengeance and the hidden mechanisms of fate. I learned that there are debts that can be written on human flesh, invisible except when moonlight reveals them, debts that compound and grow until they consume everything. The price for this knowledge was high. I would have 10 years of life remaining after my revenge was complete, and not a day more. When I had exacted the full measure of justice I sought, my own time would begin to run out like sand through an hourglass. Did I accept these terms? I accepted. I also learned that the being offering this bargain was a trickster spirit, ancient and immoral, who cared nothing for justice but delighted in the games that humans played with fate. It would give me exactly what I asked for, but trickster spirits are notorious for interpreting bargains in unexpected ways. Still, I had nothing left to lose. The knowledge burned itself into my memory, and I knew what I had to do. First, I needed to disappear. The daughter of Wei Changwen could achieve nothing. She was marked, suspected, powerless. I used what I had learned to change my appearance, subtle shifts that made me unrecognizable, even to those who had known me. I became Wei Lin, a servant woman seeking employment, a person so ordinary that eyes slid past her without registering her presence. I also learned that Zhang Yao had survived his imprisonment. Cao Ren had released him after extracting a confession that implicated my father in crimes he had not committed. Yao had broken under torture, and that confession had sealed my father's fate. He lived now in shame, unable to meet the eyes of anyone who had known him before. I went to him one night, revealing myself for the first time since my transformation. I found him in a rented room near the docks, a place that smelled of fish and desperation. When he saw me, recognized me, he fell to his knees and wept. He had betrayed my father. He had signed the documents they put before him, said the words they demanded. He had been weak, he had been afraid, and his weakness had killed the man who would have been his father-in-law. I looked down at him, this man I had loved with my whole heart, and I felt nothing. The capacity for forgiveness had been burned out of me in the temple's depths, but I saw that he was already destroying himself more thoroughly than I ever could. His punishment was to live with what he had done. I gave him a single gift, a vial of poison, quick and painless. Whether he used it or not would be his choice. Then I left him there in the darkness and did not look back. Years passed. I made my way to the capital, to the Forbidden City itself. I used the knowledge the trickster spirit had given me to forge credentials, to create a history for Wei Lin, the unremarkable servant. I secured a position in the household of a minor official. I worked diligently, perfectly, making myself invisible through sheer competence. Cao Ming, the governor's brother, had indeed risen at court. He had been appointed to the Ministry of Rights and had the emperor's favor. He had married a noble woman and had 2 children. He was known for his sophistication, his literary talents, his refined taste. No one knew that his position had been built on my father's corpse. I engineered a transfer to Cao Ming's household. I became one of dozens of servants who maintained his residence, who served tea and arranged flowers and ensured that his life ran smoothly. He never recognized me. He never looked closely enough at servants to recognize anyone. But I watched him. I learned his habits, his secrets, his vulnerabilities. And I waited. Cao Ren, the governor, had also come to the capital. He had been promoted to the Ministry of Justice, a position of great power. The brothers had achieved everything they had schemed for. They were untouchable, protected by rank and influence and the emperor's favor. I spent 5 years in Cao Ming's household, moving like a ghost through the chambers of his life. And during those 5 years, I learned something that changed everything. Cao Ming was afraid of his brother. Cao Ren had used his younger brother's ambition as a tool, pushing him forward at court while maintaining control over him through 1,000 subtle manipulations. Cao Ming lived in constant fear of displeasing his brother, of losing the position and status that Cao Ren had arranged for him. It was not a relationship between brothers, but between master and puppet. This knowledge gave me a new understanding of how to exact my revenge. The trickster spirit had given me the ability to mark souls, to write debts in invisible ink that only appeared in moonlight. But the marks were not merely symbolic. They were bindings, contracts written on flesh itself. If crafted correctly, they could transfer guilt, redirect fate, make the innocent appear culpable, and the culpable appear innocent. I had marked Cao Ming years ago, on a night when I brought him tea that had been drugged with a sleeping potion. I had written his crimes on his skin in an ink, made from ingredients the trickster spirit had shown me how to prepare: my own blood, ashes from my father's execution site, and the venom of a certain snake that lived only in the deepest wells. The mark was invisible to normal sight, but moonlight would reveal it as surely as fire reveals words written in lemon juice. But that mark was only the beginning, the foundation for the revenge I truly sought. Cao Ren was the architect of my destruction, and therefore Cao Ren had to fall furthest. Not quickly, not cleanly, but slowly, through the ruin of everything he valued. I needed him to understand what he had done, to feel what I had felt, to lose what he had taken. It took me 3 more years to secure a position in the imperial household itself, to become one of the servants who attended the emperor directly. By this time, I had become a woman of 35, unremarkable in appearance, perfect in service, invisible in the way that servants must be to survive in the Forbidden City. The Emperor Zhenlong was a man of 40 years, scholarly and conscientious, genuinely devoted to the welfare of his people. He trusted Cao Ren completely, relied on his counsel in matters of justice and law. They had known each other since youth, when Cao Ren had served in the household of the previous emperor. That relationship, that trust, was the foundation of Cao Ren's power. I needed to destroy it. The mark I had placed on Cao Ming was designed to activate slowly, to spread like ink in water. It would begin to appear during the autumn moon festival, when the moonlight was strongest, when the emperor traditionally reviewed the cases of all condemned prisoners to determine if any deserved clemency. The mark would reveal Cao Ming's true character, his hidden crimes, his corrupt nature. But more than that, it would reveal Cao Ren's role in covering up those crimes. Because I had been busy during my years in Cao Ming's household, I had carefully, meticulously, created a trail of evidence that showed Cao Ren protecting his brother from justice, accepting bribes to conceal Cao Ming's offenses, manipulating the legal system to serve his family's interests. I had forged documents, planted evidence, created a web of corruption that was entirely fabricated, but would appear entirely authentic. Just as Cao Ren had done to my father, the autumn moon festival arrived with clear skies and perfect weather. The court celebrated with poetry readings and musical performances. The emperor walked in the palace gardens, admiring the chrysanthemums that bloomed gold and white under the full moon's light. The imperial physician made his discovery during the customary examination that always preceded the festival banquet. The emperor had been complaining of fatigue, and the physician was checking for any signs of illness when he saw the mark on the emperor's chest, a strange black stain that appeared only when moonlight touched the skin. This was not part of my plan. The mark I had placed was meant for Cao Ming, not the emperor, but I realized, with a horror that made my hands shake, what must have happened. The trickster spirit had warned me that bargains would be interpreted in unexpected ways. I had asked for the means to destroy those who had destroyed me. Cao Ren and Cao Ming were my targets, but the spirit had given me something more, the ability to mark anyone whose actions had led to my father's death. And the emperor had signed the death warrant. The emperor who had trusted Cao Ren's lies and believed the fabricated evidence and ordered my father's execution. The emperor was not innocent in this story, regardless of whether he had known the truth. The trickster spirit had marked him through me, had used my hand to write a debt I had not consciously intended. The mark was spreading. The physician could see it growing even as he watched, black lines like calligraphy spreading across the emperor's skin, writing words in a script that hurt to look at. The emperor demanded to know what this was, how it had appeared, what it meant. I was summoned, along with all the servants who had attended the emperor in recent weeks. We knelt in a row while the imperial physician examined us, looking for any sign that we might have poisoned or cursed the Son of Heaven. He found nothing, of course. The mark had been placed years ago, had lain dormant, waiting for this specific night to activate. But I knew what would happen next. The mark would continue to spread, and eventually it would reach the emperor's heart. When it did, he would die, slowly and in great pain, unless someone who understood the nature of the curse could remove it. I was the only person who possessed that knowledge. The trickster spirit had given me what I asked for, but it had also trapped me in a dilemma of its own design. I could destroy my enemies, but only by revealing myself and the means I had used to achieve my revenge. I could let the emperor die, but his death would likely trigger a succession crisis that would plunge the empire into chaos. Innocent people, thousands of them, would suffer. Or I could save him, explain the truth, and accept whatever punishment came. This was the true bargain, I realized. The trickster spirit had given me power, but it had also given me a choice that would define my soul. I spent that night in agonized contemplation. The festival continued around me, music and laughter echoing through the palace while I wrestled with questions I had never expected to face. I had spent 20 years focused on revenge, had sacrificed everything for this moment of justice. But what kind of justice killed thousands to punish two? By morning, I had decided. I requested an audience with the emperor. Such requests from servants were rarely granted, But the mark on his chest was spreading faster now, and the court was growing desperate. Any possibility, however remote, would be investigated. They brought me before him in his private chambers. Cao Ren was there, and Chao Ming, and the imperial physician, and a dozen other officials and advisors. The emperor sat on a simple chair, his chest bare, the black mark visible even without moonlight now, a sprawling text of condemnation written on his own skin. I looked at Cao Ren, and I saw the moment he recognized me. His face went white as paper. Cao Ming looked confused, but Cao Ren knew exactly who I was, even through the changes wrought by time and by the trickster spirit's gift. I told them everything. I explained who I was, what had been done to my father, the bargain I had made in the temple beneath the moon. I described how I had marked Cao Ming, how the evidence of his and his brother's corruption was waiting to be discovered in places I had prepared. I explained the nature of the curse on the emperor's skin. It was a debt written in moonlight, a bill come due for a death ordered in ignorance of truth. The room was silent as a tomb when I finished speaking. The emperor looked at me with eyes that held unexpected compassion. "You were wrong terribly," he said. "Your father was innocent?" "He was innocent, Your Majesty. The evidence against him was entirely fabricated by Governor Cao Ren to punish my father for refusing an unwanted marriage proposal." Cao Ren tried to protest, but the emperor silenced him with a gesture. "These accusations will be investigated thoroughly. But first, tell me, can you remove this mark?" "I can, Your Majesty, but the price is high." "What price?" "The trickster spirit's bargain was that I would have 10 years of life after my revenge was complete. If I remove the mark, if I choose mercy over vengeance, that bargain is broken. I do not know what will happen to me. I may die instantly. I may suffer some other fate. The spirit does not appreciate having its games disrupted." The emperor studied me for a long moment. "You would risk this to save me, knowing that I signed your father's death warrant?" "You were deceived, Your Majesty. You acted on false information. My quarrel is with those who created the deception, not with those who were deceived by it." I paused. "And the empire needs its emperor. My revenge is not worth the chaos and suffering that would follow your death." This was the truth, though not the complete truth. The complete truth was that I had discovered, somewhere in the long years of planning and waiting, that revenge was not enough. It could not bring my father back, could not undo what had been done. It could only create more suffering, more injustice, more grief. Redemption, I had learned, was a harder path than revenge. But it was the only path that led anywhere worth going. The emperor nodded slowly. "Remove the mark, Wei Lin. Whatever happens, you will have the empire's gratitude." I approached him and placed my hands on his chest, over the spreading black stain. I spoke the words the trickster spirit had taught me, but I spoke them backward, unmaking instead of making, releasing instead of binding. I felt the mark resist, felt the trickster spirit's anger at being cheated of its game. The pain was extraordinary. It felt as though every bone in my body was breaking. Every nerve was on fire. I heard someone screaming and realized it was me. The mark on the emperor's chest began to fade, the black lines retreating, flowing from his skin into my hands, up my arms, spreading across my own body. I was taking the curse into myself. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Cao Ren's face, twisted with fear and guilt and the certain knowledge that his crimes would now be fully investigated, that everything he had built was crumbling. I woke 3 days later in a chamber in the palace, attended by the finest physicians in the empire. The curse had not killed me, but it had exacted its price. My hair had gone white as winter snow. I could no longer walk without assistance, as though I had aged 50 years in an instant. I could feel the remaining time of my life like sand running through my fingers, but I was alive. The emperor visited me personally. The investigation into Cao Ren and Cao Ming's activities had revealed everything I had claimed and more. The evidence I had planted had led investigators to actual crimes, a network of corruption that extended far beyond what I had fabricated. The brothers had been arrested. They would face trial for their crimes, including the false accusation that had led to my father's execution. "Your father's name will be cleared," the emperor told me. "His reputation will be restored. His honors returned posthumously. It is inadequate compensation for what was taken from you, but it is what justice allows. Thank you, Your Majesty. I must ask you a question, Wei Lin. Why did you not simply come to me years ago with evidence of Cao Ren's corruption? Why this elaborate revenge? I smiled bitterly. Would Your Majesty have believed the desperate accusations of a young woman whose father had just been convicted of corruption? Would you have investigated a trusted advisor based on the word of someone with every reason to lie? The powerless cannot simply demand justice from the powerful. They must create it. The Emperor looked troubled. You speak a hard truth. The system failed you, and your father catastrophically. I cannot undo that failure, but I can ensure you are cared for during your remaining time. He granted me a residence by the West Lake, near where my family's home had once stood. He provided servants to care for me, physicians to ease my pain, and a pension sufficient to live in comfort. It was more than I had expected. I had one more visit to make. Zhang Yao was still alive, though barely. He had not used the poison I had given him. Instead, he had spent 20 years in a kind of living death, working as a laborer on the docks, drinking his wages, seeking oblivion in wine, and forgetting. When I found him, he was a broken man who looked 70, though he was barely 40. I told him what had happened, how Cao Ren and Chao Ming would face justice, how my father's name had been cleared. I told him that I had forgiven him for his weakness, that I understood he had broken under torture that no one should have had to endure. He wept, and this time I wept with him. Not for what might have been between us, that was dead and gone, but for the two young people who had walked by the West Lake in spring, who had believed in love and justice and the basic goodness of the world. You have suffered enough, I told him. Let that suffering end. I left him with enough silver to live comfortably for the rest of his life, if he chose to use it for living rather than for drinking himself to death. What he did with that choice was beyond my power to control. I lived by the West Lake for 9 more years, watching the willows bend and rise with the wind, watching the seasons turn. The trickster spirit had kept its bargain after all, in its own twisted way. I had 10 years after my revenge was complete, just as promised. The fact that I had chosen mercy over vengeance did not negate the completion of the bargain. Cao Ren and Cao Ming had been destroyed as thoroughly as I could have wished, but I also had something the trickster spirit had never intended me to have: peace. On the last day of my life, I returned to the temple of the moon goddess. I crossed to the island in a hired boat. Since I could no longer row myself, I descended the stairs to the ancient chamber below, where the altar still stood stained with offerings from ages past. The darkness was waiting for me. You cheated, it said, in a voice like wind through empty rooms. I fulfilled our bargain exactly, I replied. You gave me the means to destroy my enemies. I used those means. That I chose to temper justice with mercy was not forbidden by our agreement. You disrupted the game. You were supposed to destroy yourself in destroying them. That is how these stories end. Perhaps that is how your stories end, Spirit. But this was my story, and I chose how it ended. There was a long silence, and then something that might have been laughter. You are a better trickster than I gave you credit for, Wei Lin. You bargained for revenge and found redemption instead. You played the game and changed the rules while playing. Very well. Your time is complete. Your debt is paid. Go to whatever waits beyond. One question before I go, I said. Why did you mark the Emperor? I never intended that. Did you not? You asked to destroy those who destroyed you. The Emperor was among them, however unwitting his participation. I gave you what you asked for, nothing more and nothing less. What you did with it was your choice. I understood then. The trickster spirit had given me the power to destroy everyone who had played any role in my father's death. The Tao brothers, the Emperor, even Zhang Yao, who had provided false testimony. But it had also given me the power to choose mercy, to find a path between vengeance and forgiveness. The game had never been about revenge. It had been about what I would become in pursuing it. I climbed the stairs for the last time and emerged into moonlight. The autumn moon festival was being celebrated again, just as it had been 9 years before. I could hear music drifting across the water from the city, laughter and singing, and the sounds of life continuing. I sat beneath a willow tree and watched the moon's reflection shimmer on the lake's surface. My father had once told me that the moon goddess watches over all those who have been wronged, that she remembers every injustice and every act of mercy, and that she weighs them in balance when souls pass from this world to the next. I hoped he was right. I hoped he was waiting for me somewhere beyond the veil, ready to tell me that I had done well, that I had honored his memory not through vengeance, but through the choice to break the cycle of harm. The moon rose higher, full and bright and beautiful. I felt my breath slowing, my heartbeat quieting. The debt written in moonlight had been paid in full, all accounts settled, all bargains fulfilled. And I discovered in that final moment that I was not afraid. I had lived, loved, suffered, and chosen mercy when vengeance was within my grasp. I had played the trickster spirit's game and won by refusing to play by its rules. The willows bent in the night breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a flute played a melody I remembered from childhood. I closed my eyes and let the moonlight wash over me, and I was free.